Sabbath keepers in the 5th century. Example 1, the then known world. For although almost all churches throughout the world celebrated the sacred mysteries, the Lord's Supper, on the Sabbath of every week, yet the Christians of Alexandria and at Rome, on account of some ancient tradition, refused to do this. Footnote given regarding the use of the word Sabbath. It says, that is, upon the Saturday. It should be observed that Sunday is never called the Sabbath by the ancient fathers and historians. Source: Socrates, Ecclesiastical History. Example 2, the Christians in Constantinople. The people of Constantinople, and almost everywhere, assemble together on the Sabbath, as well as on the first day of the week, which custom is never observed at Rome or at Alexandria. Source: Socrates, Ecclesiastical History. Example 3, the world, according to Augustine, Bishop of Hippo, living in North Africa. Augustine shows here that the Sabbath was observed in his day, in the greater part of the Christian world, and his testimony in this respect is all the more valuable because he himself was an earnest and consistent Sunday keeper. Source: Nicene and Post-Nicene Fathers. Example 4, Pope Innocent, AD 402–417. Pope Sylvester, AD 314–335, was the first to order the churches to fast on Saturday, and Pope Innocent, 402–417, made it a binding law in the churches that obeyed him, in order to bring the Sabbath into disfavor. Innocentius did ordain the Saturday or Sabbath to be always fasted. Source: Dr. Peter Halen, History of the Sabbath. Example 5, 5th century Christians. Down even to the 5th century the observance of the Jewish Sabbath was continued in the Christian Church. Source: Ancient Christianity Exemplified, Lyman Coleman. Example 6, 5th century Christians. In Jerome's day, 420 AD, the devoutest Christians did ordinary work on Sunday. Source: Treatise of the Sabbath Day by Dr. White, Lord Bishop of Ely. Example 7, in France. Wherefore, except Vespers and Nocturnes, there are no public services among them in the day except on Saturday, Sabbath, and Sunday. Source: John Cassian, a French monk, Institutes. Example 8, in Africa. Augustine deplored the fact that in 2 neighboring churches in Africa one observes the 7th-day Sabbath, another fasted on it. Source: Dr. Peter Halen, The History of the Sabbath. Example 9, in Spain, 400 AD. Ambrose sanctified the 7th day as the Sabbath, as he himself says. Ambrose had great influence in Spain, which was also observing the Saturday Sabbath. Source: Truth Triumphant. Example 10, Sidonius, speaking of King Theodoric of the Goths, AD 454–526. It is a fact that it was formerly the custom in the East to keep the Sabbath in the same manner as the Lord's Day and to hold sacred assemblies, while on the other hand, the people of the West, contending for the Lord's Day have neglected the celebration of the Sabbath. Source: Apollinary's Sidonii Epistolae. Example 11, regarding the Church of the East. Mingana proves that in 410 AD Isaac, supreme director of the Church of the East, held a world council, stimulated, some think, by the trip of Musaeus, attended by Eastern delegates from 40 grand metropolitan divisions. In 411 AD he appointed a metropolitan director for China. These churches were sanctifying the 7th day. Example 12, in Egypt. There are several cities and villages in Egypt where, contrary to the usage established elsewhere, the people meet together on Sabbath evenings, and, although they have dined previously, partake of the mysteries. Source: Sozomen. Ecclesiastical History. Sabbath keepers in the 6th century. Example 1, the Scottish Church. In this latter instance they seem to have followed a custom of which we find traces in the early monastic Church of Ireland, by which they held Saturday to be the Sabbath on which they rested from all their labors. Source: W. T. Skene, Adamnan's Life of St. Columba. Example 2, in Scotland and Ireland. We seem to see here an allusion to the custom, observed in the early monastic Church of Ireland, of keeping the day of rest on Saturday, or the Sabbath. Source: History of the Catholic Church in Scotland, by Catholic historian Bellisheim. Example 3, in Scotland, Columba, the founder of Iona Abbey. Having continued his labors in Scotland 34 years, he clearly and openly foretold his death, and on Saturday, the month of June, said to his disciple Diarmid, "This day is called the Sabbath, that is the rest day, and such will it truly be to me, for it will put an end to my labors." Source: Butler's Lives of the Saints. Example 4, Columba, regarding Dr. Butler's description of his death. The editor of the best biography of Columba says in a footnote, "Our Saturday, the custom to call the Lord's Day Sabbath did not commence until 1,000 years later." Source: Adamnan's Life of Columba. Sabbath keepers in the 7th century. Example 1, in Scotland and Ireland. Professor James C. Moffat, D.D., professor of church history at Princeton, says, "It seems to have been customary in the Celtic churches of early times, in Ireland as well as Scotland, to keep Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath, as a day of rest from labor. They obeyed the 4th commandment literally upon the 7th day of week." Source: The Church in Scotland. Example 2, in Scotland and Ireland. The Celts used a Latin Bible unlike the Vulgate, RC, and kept Saturday as a day of rest, with special religious services on Sunday. Source: Flick, The Rise of Medieval Church. Example 3, in Rome. Gregory I, AD 590–640, wrote against Roman citizens, who forbid any work being done on the Sabbath day. Source: Nicene and Post-Nicene Fathers. Example 4, in Rome, Pope Gregory I, AD 590–0604. Gregory, bishop by the grace of God to his well-beloved sons, the Roman citizens, "It has come to me that certain men of perverse spirit have disseminated among you things depraved and opposed to the holy faith, so that they forbid anything to be done on the day of the Sabbath. What shall I call them except preachers of Antichrist?" Source: Epistles. Example 5, in Rome, Pope Gregory I declared that when Antichrist should come he would keep Saturday as the Sabbath. Source: Epistles of Gregory I, found in Nicene and Post-Nicene Fathers. Example 6, in Rome, Pope Gregory I. Moreover, this same Pope Gregory had issued an official pronouncement against a section of the city of Rome itself because the Christian believers there rested and worshipped on the Sabbath. Source: Epistles of Gregory I. Sabbath keepers in the 8th century. Example 1, the Council of Friaul, Italy AD 791, Canon 13. "We command all Christians to observe the Lord's Day to be held not in honor of the past Sabbath, but on account of that holy night of the first of the week called the Lord's Day." When speaking of that Sabbath which the Jews observe, the last day of the week, and which also our peasants observe. Source: Monsi. Example 2, in Persia and Mesopotamia. The hills of Persia and the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates re-echoed their songs of praise. They reaped their harvests and paid their tithes. They repaired to their churches on the Sabbath day for the worship of God. Source: Real Encyclopédie für Protestantischen Kirche, Art. Nestorianer, also Yule, the Book of Ser Marco Polo. Example 3, in India, China, Persia and elsewhere. Widespread and enduring was the observance of the seventh-day Sabbath among the believers of the Church of the East and the St. Thomas Christians of India, who never were connected with Rome. It also was maintained among those bodies which broke off from Rome after the Council of Chalcedon, namely, the Abyssinians, the Jacobites, the Maronites, and the Armenians. Source: Schaffherzog, The New Encyclopedia of Religious Knowledge. Example 4, the Council of Liftini, Belgium AD 745, attended by Boniface. The third allocution of this council warns against the observance of the Sabbath, referring to the decree of the Council of Laodicea. Source: Dr. Hefeel, Councilian Fesh.